I missed a day yesterday. Um, it's because I was on my deathbed. So today I have risen from my death. I'm being overly dramatic. I'm sick. I don't feel good. So I didn't do one yesterday. I still don't feel great, but the news must go forth. We must talk about this. One by land, two by sea. What did Paul Revere say? Something like that. Or through rain, sleet, and snow, the news has got to go. Someone said something like that. I'm Jeremy. Thank you for tuning in to the daily update. Some good news about the channel. Is this a channel? It's a podcast. It's not just a podcast. It's not just a channel. It's an empire. So some news about the empire today. Yesterday we reached 50,000 followers on Twitter, on X. If you are not one of them, what are you waiting for? Hop on X and follow us. We have all kinds of fun going on the Twitter page. Polls, pictures, jokes, health care tips, recipes, you name it. There's not really health care tips, and I don't think we've ever had a recipe, but you get it. If you're a Gen Xer, man, it's a perfect place for you to be. Okay, so let's talk about this. First story is about Dee Snider. I'm conflicted about this because there are points on this where I agree with Dee. There are points where I don't. Dee is a very opinionated person. He's never met a microphone or camera he doesn't like. And when's the last time they've done music? 40 years ago? But he still finds a way to shoehorn himself into the press every now and then. So, we'd hate for that to go to waste. Dee Snider claims the PMRC wanted a complete moron to testify during the famous 1985 Senate hearings, and that he wouldn't have been invited if they had done their homework. So for those of you that maybe are too young or actually were living a productive life, you might have missed out on all this. Back in 1985, year I graduated from high school, by the way, there was this group led by Tipper Gore, this group of angry women that they were out to stop. I got to be careful the way I say it. They were really about labeling and in some cases censoring popular music, mostly rock music, right? So they had this campaign. They're calling people to testify in Congress. Famously, Frank Zappa, Dee Snider, and John Denver all appeared in front of Congress, and their message was all the same. Whether it was John Denver or Frank Zappa, the message was the same as, hey, don't limit people's free expression. If people don't like it, they don't have to listen, which I completely agree with. Completely on point with that message. Well, Dee Snider is on the Steve-O Wild Ride with Steve-O podcast, and he says, yeah, they wanted a moron, and he actually cites he said they wanted an idiot like Vince Neil to testify. He does not like Vince Neil. We'll get into that in a minute. But he said they assumed, now here's where Dee gets a little pompous. He says, we're one of the biggest bands in the world. We're on the Filthy 15. So the Filthy 15 was this list of bands that the PMRC did not like and wanted to shut down. So we were literal targets. So they figured, oh, this guy looks like a complete moron or an incomplete moron, which is even worse. Let's get him. But then he says, but if they had just spent a moment, there was no social media. But he's saying if they would have just dug into him a little bit, they would have realized, look, this guy's married. He doesn't do drugs. He doesn't drink. Wait a second. We don't want this guy. His whole point is that they weren't aware of what they were getting when they called him to testify. And I'm sure they weren't, because Dee, he did a great job. Got to hand it to him. Eloquent, very smart guy. Not denying that. But Dee has really milked his moment in the sun in 1985 for all it's worth. Remember a month or so back, we talked about a comic book. You can, not a comic book, a graphic novel, which is a long comic book that you can get, which is about Dee testifying. They made it into a whole comic book now. Graphic novel now. D defending the First Amendment in front of Congress, and it's called We're Not Going to Take It Anymore. So, but he has never been a fan of Vince Neil. And I don't know if you guys remember this, way back in the 80s or 90s, Vince Neil was liquored up and got in a car crash that killed someone. The drummer from, can't remember the band, another LA band, but he basically was responsible for this guy dying. And so Vince or D is like, has called him a murderer, right? So there's no love lost between D Snyder and Vince Neil. And, he says that PMRC wanted an idiot like Vince to testify. So I don't know. There's some strong words. I think we can all agree that Vince has actually been way more successful than D. I don't know. But there you go. Kiss. I know you guys will be surprised to hear this, but Gene and Paul have found another way to cash in on their End of the Road tour. Shocker. I know that these guys would try and make more money. Kiss will officially reach the End of the Road tour on December 2nd at Madison Square Garden. And they're offering fans from all over the world a chance to bid them farewell with a live stream pay-per-view event. Imagine all these guys in their 50s and 60s sitting in their basement who will happily shell out $39.99 to see this pay-per-view. I won't mention any names, but that's another way that their fans can say goodbye to the legend of Kiss. Guys, let's not deceive ourselves. Kiss ain't going nowhere. I mean, this tour is ending, but they've already laid the foundation, and we've talked about it. Mark my words, give it maybe 2 or 3 years. You will see a Kiss tour going on that does not feature Gene and Paul. It will be like the annual Trans-Siberian Orchestra tour that rolls through your town. There will be a Kiss tour that rolls through your town every year or two, where you can go and see guys dressed up like Kiss playing Kiss tunes. Mark my words, it's coming. But there is a pay-per-view that you can watch of their final show, December 2nd, Madison Square Garden. So check that out. Have you guys heard about the Bob Daisley Holy Grail debacle? Not debacle. It's not a debacle. That's not the right word. So let's talk about this. This is a big part of Ozzy lore. Bob Daisley was the bassist and the songwriter. I mean, he wrote 90% of the lyrics and was involved with Randy Rhoads writing the music for the first two, the good two Ozzy Osbourne albums, right? That sounded snarky. There was some good stuff after that, but man, here's Blizzard and Diary. There you go. Here's Blizzard and Diary. Here's the next best. Okay. I mean, those two are magical, right? And Bob Daisley was instrumental in all that. Him contributing, working with Randy to write the music. And then Bob wrote almost all of the lyrics. Okay. So Bob was a foundational person in Ozzy having a successful solo career. And and Ozzy even brought him back for later albums. Even when Zach was in the band. And I think even with Jake, Bob was involved. Bob famously recorded everything. Rehearsals, just working on riffs. Bob recorded everything. He has over 70 hours of, not 70, 7. He has over 7 hours of recordings with Randy and the band working on material. Over 7 hours. And he's he's referred to it as the Holy Grail, and he wants to release it. And for whatever reason, the Osbournes say he can't. I'm not sure how they can keep him from I don't know. I don't understand all the legal wranglings. But on the Osbournes podcast, by the way, so there's this podcast that Jack, Ozzy's son, hosts, and he will have Sharon and Ozzy on, and they talk, and which is cool, but it really only gives you one side of the story, right? So they talk about this in the latest installment. There's a quote here. Someone commented on a post somewhere, and it was like, oh, when's Ozzy going to let Bob Daisley release the recordings of Randy Rhoads writing in the studio? Jack Osbourne says. Supposedly, I don't know if it exists, but there's audio recordings of Randy, Dad, and Daisley writing stuff for Blizzard or Diary. And Daisy's gone out and said, oh, Ozzy's not letting me release it. I turned around and said, why should he release it? He should give it to Randy's family, and it should be up to them if they release it or not, he adds, to which Sharon replies, exactly. But according to Ozzy, he says the quality of it sucks. He said Bob would record everything we ever did. He would record the effing Milkman. The quality is dreadful. So it's bad quality. Sharon says, yes, it was recorded on a cassette machine, a tiny little cassette machine. And it's not for us to do anything with. So her point is, hey, it's not our call to make. It's up to the Rhoads family, whatever. But here's the part they don't tell you. And that is that when they were releasing the box set a few years ago, Bob approached them and said, hey, he always calls it the Holy Grail. He said, hey, I've got the Holy Grail. If you guys want to, I'm sure it wasn't this magnanimous. It was, I'm sure, if you guys want to buy it, okay, I've got it. This would be a great thing for the box set, which it would have been pretty cool. I mean, it would have been cool. And they did want to buy it. And they offered what Bob calls a pittance. Okay, they gave him a really low price, and he wouldn't do it, right? So it's a little disingenuous for them to say, oh no, the quality's bad, we don't want it, or it's really up to the family, when they in fact did want it and did offer Bob money for it, but just not enough. Okay, so just another little angle on that. But guys, remember, Sharon is the person that re-released Blizzard and Diary with new bass player and drummer, okay? Because she didn't want to have to pay Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake anymore. So she literally re-recorded versions of those albums, removing Bob and Lee's parts and had them replayed with different players. Do you believe that? Imagine all the classic albums. Someone decides, hey, I know, let's go back and remove members of the band. Let's go back to Jimi Hendrix Experience and remove Mitch Mitchell so we don't have to pay him anything. Let's put a new studio guy on playing his. Can you imagine that? That's what she did. And so, yeah, I mean, you kind of got to take anything with a grain of salt that comes out of Sharon's mouth. Sorry to say it. But Bob was instrumental in Ozzy's solo career. And remember, the whole reason that, nothing against Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo, I love those guys, but the whole reason they came into the picture, Sharon didn't like Bob and Lee because they wouldn't march. They wouldn't march, keep their mouths shut and march along, right? She was wanting to pay them less than the guys wanted to be paid. She was wanting them to play 2 shows. I mean, it was, Bob has a book called For Fact's Sake, where he talks about all of this, and they made it sound like it was an issue with passports and all, and it wasn't. They wanted band members that would step in line, that they would do whatever Sharon told them to do. That's why Lee and Bob recorded the 2 albums, but never toured in the US. Okay. They did the British Blizzard of Oz tour. That's all that Lee and Bob ever did with Ozzy. And from then on out, the Blizzard tour in the US and then the Diary tour in the US was Tommy and Rudy. Nothing against those guys, but that's why they were brought in, because Sharon didn't want to work with Bob and Lee because they were a little more seasoned. They knew what they were doing, and there was just conflict between them. So it is what it is, right? Someday, maybe we'll hear these Holy Grail tapes. The thing is, now there's the technology now that even if the quality is not that great, they can fix it up pretty well to where it would sound pretty good. I think it'd be cool for the fans to get. So hopefully that'll get worked out. So, hey, let me show you an album. I've been trying to show you an album that I recommend, that I really enjoy every day. Here's one. Many of you may already have this or be familiar with this. This is kind of a little one-off album that was put out, HSAS, Neil Sean, Sammy Hagar, Aronson, and Shreve. I don't remember their first names. Can't remember. Anyways, this was recorded in November of 83, which is, November of 83. That's exactly what, 40 years ago? Yeah, so 40 years ago. That's right? 40 years ago? That's ridiculous. So 40 years ago, this was recorded. This actually didn't come out until early in 84, but it was recorded in November of 83, 40 years ago. It's a live recording. Neil Sean, Sammy Hagar, this Aronson is actually the bass player, and then this Shreve. This guy, sorry, I can't point to the right guy backwards. This bass player, you might recognize him. He was Billy Squier's bass player in the early days. Really good bass player, really sweet pompadour going on too, but he was good. This is a fun album, a great live album. It's rocking and ripping. You know, Neil Sean is an underrated. He's awesome. The dude can really play. And of course, it's Sammy. Sammy's one of the great vocalists of all time. If you can ever find this thing, snag it. It's a great album, great live record, and it's one I highly recommend. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you so much for following us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Again, if you want to be a subscriber and help support us, it's only $1 a month on X. Also, there's a way you can support us for just $1 a month on Spotify as well. So you hardly notice $1 a month. You don't even notice it's gone, but it helps us a lot in putting out the podcast, keeping the channel and the empire running. So if that's something you could do, that would be great. Thanks so much. It's Friday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you later. Live long and prosper.